Good afternoon and welcome to today's Adweek webinar, where we will be looking at the state of sports marketing and sports sponsorship, and really what's involved in taking a data-driven approach to some of this. And it's going to be some exclusive research. You're actually going to be getting a preview of a report that's due to come out from our sponsors at Core. I'm Stuart File, Vice President of Branded Content at Adweek, and I'm going to be your host for today's webinar. As with all of our webinars, I'm just going to take a few minutes here to do some of the standard housekeeping, let you know what to expect from today's event, and also make sure you know all the features of our webinar platform. Our presentation today should go somewhere in the 35, might go a little over, closer to 40 minutes. I just want to make sure that you're aware of some of that, but let's figure about 35 minutes. Afterwards, we are going to have plenty of time for audience Q&A. So I want to invite everyone, if at any point during today's presentation, if you have a question for our speakers, just use the question tool that you should see there on your screen. It's probably there on the left side, somewhere near where you're seeing my image. So use that to submit your questions, and we're going to get to as many audience questions as we can following our live presentation. It's not too late to invite your colleagues to come and join us today. We would really love it if they would. And to make that easy for you, we sent you a final reminder email for today's event about 15 minutes ago. In there, you're going to find a link over to the registration page. It's a bit.ly. Grab that, send it off to your colleagues. They still have plenty of time to register. Come on in and join us live. But if they can't make it live, today's webinar is being recorded. It will be available on demand, and we're going to send you a link to that on-demand recording yourself later this afternoon once it's live, probably about 3:30, 4 o'clock Eastern time. So keep your eyes out for that, and certainly feel free to share that with your colleagues as well. But again, if you have to leave early or you're going to miss some of this, you can always check out that recording, and it's going to be live for the next 12 months. Also, you're going to see on your screen an event resources area, and I always like to point that out because we do like to make the slides of the presentation available, and people frequently ask for that. So you'll find a PDF of today's slides in the resources area, so feel free to go on in, download that, share those with your colleagues as well. So let me move on to today's webinar and just pretty quickly here introduce our speakers to you. As I said, our speakers are from Core, and Core is it's a sponsorship analytics and measurement platform, and we're really going to get some great insights from our speaker, Scott Tilton. Scott's the EVP for Brand Sponsorship Analytics over at Core. He's the former CEO and co-founder of Hookit, which was an AI-powered sponsorship analytics platform, and that was acquired by Core last year in 2022. And so for multiple decades, Scott has been a pioneer in SponTech, right? Sponsorship technology, that convergence of sponsorship and analytics. Scott's going to be joined by RJ Krause. RJ is the head of social over at Core. He was as I mentioned, the other co-founder of Hookit. And he's been, again, at the intersection of sponsorship, sports, social media, and technology for over 20 years, focusing on and right now developing a platform that empowers brands and rights holders to manage, measure, and optimize their sponsorship portfolios more effectively. So you've heard my introductions, but rather than an introduction, I think you should be speaking to the people directly. So let me bring Scott and RJ on screen and over to our webinar, gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. Really appreciate the opportunity, and thank you everyone for tuning in today. Yeah, Stuart mentioned RJ and I were the former co-founders of Hookit. We've been in this space for over 20 years, always at the forefront of merging sponsorship and technology and data and analytics to really just help the industry evolve and kind of improve the overall effectiveness of how we do business. The acquisition with Core last year was a really strategic one. We've been focused on the same kind of set of challenges that the industry faces from a sponsorship and sports marketing perspective, but have really approached it from two different angles, if you will. Where Hookit had always been focused on the sponsorship analytics and the measurement of social and digital. Core was very focused on the really the sponsorship management and data warehousing and CRM and asset management. So the two platforms coming together made a ton of sense for the industry to really build out this single source platform to help both brands and rights holders manage, measure, and optimize your partnerships as effectively as possible. Also, by coming together, we now work with over 1,000 of the world's biggest brands, rights holders, agencies. So we've just got a really great footprint in terms of our industry expertise and our knowledge and who we work with. And so today we're going to be taking you through a lot of the data and the insights that we see happening in the space. There's going to be some interesting kind of trends that we can compare pre-COVID to post-COVID and what happened in 2022. And then we're going to end with a lot of the current trends that we're seeing, many of which we kind of presented a few years ago of where we saw the industry and our predictions on where things were headed, and kind of a status update on kind of how it's evolved, and then some of the new things that we're hearing as well. So we'll kind of wrap up with that towards the end. So everything that we're about to go through is really looking at our collective platform and data set. Together we've got, the single biggest data and intelligence platform really for the sports and entertainment ecosystem. So we're actively tracking about $52 billion in sponsorship spend. So we understand which properties, so which athletes, teams, and leagues, where that money is going, which assets are really being focused and spent on. And then when you look at the sport and entertainment graph that we put together, that's really kind of our IP and our expertise in terms of how we track the social media landscape. So we're actively tracking over 500,000 entities across sport and entertainment. We've ingested over 3 billion social posts and really analyze all of that to look at how are brands being promoted via all of these different channels. And when you look at the entities that we're tracking and the collective reach, we've essentially mapped 32 billion fan connections. So we have a really good understanding of how are brands being promoted by these athletes, teams, and leagues? How are the audiences responding and engaging with that content? So all of that together really gives us a really good lens into how the industry is really shaping up and evolving. So starting with some just kind of industry trends and stats of what we're seeing out there, about $57 billion is being spent on global sponsorship right now. That's not just sport, that's also music, entertainment, et cetera. The industry is expected to continue growing at a really good clip. So it's an area where brands are investing a ton of money. One of the really interesting insights that we've have seen since 2019 before COVID is that despite the increase in spend, there's actually fewer partnerships being done, meaning that brands are getting savvier with the data and the measurement side of things and really doubling down on their most valuable partnerships. So it's really interesting for us to see that more money is going into the most valuable properties and the most valuable partnerships by the brands, but they are being more selective on who they want to work with. With that said, really the measurement side of things is still lagging a bit. This report from MASB showed 78% of brands are reporting increased pressure to validate financial results on the sponsorships, but 60% don't have standardized measurement processes or frameworks in place to actually do it, and 40% straight up said they don't even try to measure it. So this is still a huge area of opportunity, and really where our focus as a business is on helping the brands especially get systems and frameworks in place so that they can optimize their partnerships, really understand and measure the true impact, which will result in much higher returns on investment. So this is probably the central biggest area of focus for us on how do we get the industry aligned, both brands and rights holders, on having these frameworks to really measure impact and improve results from a sponsorship perspective. So with that, I'll hand it over to RJ to start getting into the data.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott, and hello, everyone. Let's jump into it. So we're going to actually dig into a lot of that data that Scott talked about. So we have sponsorship spend, asset objective data across 16 industries against about 1,000 different leagues, teams, properties, brands, agencies. all aggregated and anonymized. And then on the social side, obviously we're tracking, like Scott mentioned, we're tracking every athlete, team, league, event, venue in social media. So we're going to be digging into the 20 million posts that they generated over the past year and all the brand exposure that came out of that, who the social stars are, and some insights around activation and what you can take home with you to use in the space. This is kind of a sneak peek into our State of the Industry report, which is due out in a couple weeks. So thanks to Adweek for giving that opportunity. And this is a part of our broader workshop and webinar series. So we do about one a month or a couple a month. We recently did workshops on NFL, Formula One, global football, and we have one coming up this month on NBA. So stay tuned for that. We'd love to have anyone on here to join us for those. But really what we're trying to do is dig into this unique data set that we have to deliver insight around sports marketing and sponsorship. So let's see what happened in 2022. Really, this was coming out of the pandemic. We've seen kind of moderate change plus or minus year over year. But the real story is massive increase across the board versus pre-pandemic times. So we're seeing average spend per deal up 20%, engagement up 46%, brand value up 39% versus pre-pandemic times. And we're seeing some massive numbers on the social side. So that's a general trend that we're seeing. Scott mentioned it in terms of number of deals out there might be less, but the spend is actually going up, engagement's going up, and value amongst brands in social is going up. Digging into the sponsorship deals, we saw is obviously a dip when sport wasn't happening in 2020, but a big bounce back in 2021. So 30% increase year over year. When you look at 2022, a little bit more moderate increase year over year, 12% still, which is significant, but massive increase over 2019. So 23% increase in spend 2022 versus 2019. We're seeing average deal size go from $273,000 per deal in 2019, all the way up to $326,000 in 2022. So fewer deals, larger deal size. We're also seeing the deal length increase. So we're at over 3 years average deal length, which is encouraging. Scott's going to get into that in a little bit on some of the insights that we have. And we're seeing about the same 12 and a half assets or inventory items per deal. So that's stayed relatively flat. On the social engagement side, the story is growth again. 100 billion engagements in 2022 across all of sport. And you can see by quarter the growth since 2019, 46% increase, as I mentioned earlier. 6% over 2021, so a little bit more moderate. But when you look at the long run, social media is just gaining traction, getting more traction and driving engagement. Post frequency is slightly up, so moderate growth there, but engagement growth is massive. So engagement per post is increasing, and really, that's where people are engaging around sport and around sponsorship is social media, and we'll dive into that in a little bit. And the value side, so whereas all that engagement is driving value, massive value for brands. So 2020 and 2021. Obviously, we saw a lot of make goods when sport wasn't happening. A lot of the shift went to activation on social media, digital media. And so the value there spiked over 2019. We saw a minor dip, or we're seeing a small dip in 2022 as a result of that, but still a massive increase over 2019. So brand value, brand exposure on social media is up 39% versus pre-pandemic times. So in general, upward trend across the board and spend and social media. And Scott's going to help us dig into a little bit more on the sponsorship side. Scott?
Yeah, so when we dive into looking at which sectors, so which industries of brands are really doubling down and making the biggest investments, we had a really interesting view when we start looking at it, categorize all the brands and looking at, if you think back to that average deal size that RJ had shared earlier, the 326,000, we went across and looked at every single sector and looked at, from a percentage basis, who was spending above average or below average across the different sectors, as well as which sectors are increasing their level of spend. So this graph here basically shows, these top 5 categories: so financial, food and bev, communications and media, retail and technology are all outspending the other categories from an average deal size perspective. But the green arrows there really reflect who's actually increasing their spend. And we looked at which brands are increasing their spend year over year by at least 35%. So when you look at travel and gambling, for example, even though their average deal size is lower, they're actually increasing their spend in sports and sponsorship. So this was a really interesting view that we looked at to figuring from and how is it flowing and who's increasing their spend on sponsorship. When you look at kind of which industries are getting the most bang for their buck, this is, again, looking at all the spend data that we're sitting on, as well as the media value and exposure value that's coming from social. So retail, they rank number 1. So all the retail brands that we track, they generated the most media value and exposure in social, but their spend rank was number 4. So they had a really good return on investment from a social perspective. Travel was probably the biggest. They're ranked number 11 in terms of average spend per deal, but they rank 3rd in exposure value. Financial got kind of the biggest hit. They are spending the most, but they rank number 6 in terms of exposure and media value. And then entertainment did pretty well as well because they're ranked 14th. So there's a couple of standout categories that are getting, based on the level of spend and the investment making, how much value is coming through social media. The other elements that we're looking at is really like which assets are trending. So the assets that we're looking at are all the different components of a sponsorship deal. And this is looking at things like signage, entitlements, tickets and hospitality, social and digital, et cetera. So the interesting part here is the left graph really shows the level of revenue associated with those assets or benefits within a sponsorship deal. And then the right graph is showing which ones are consistently written into contracts. So a couple of point outs here: the top 3 assets, signage, entitlements, and tickets and hospitality, account for 70% of the revenue associated with the deals that we're seeing. And the second call out is really kind of the opportunity with social and digital. It's written into basically half of the contracts, but it's only accounting for 9% of the revenue. So you can look at that a couple of different ways, but the biggest way is it's probably an underutilized asset that brands can capitalize on, and rights holders can also capitalize on to associate a larger dollar volume to them based on the certain campaigns that you're doing with your brand partners. So yeah, it's huge demand in terms of it being contractually obligated, but it's not driving a ton of revenue yet, as a part of the sponsorship deal.
All right.
Do you want to jump into the Big 5?
Yeah. So when we zoom into the American Big 5 leagues, we're seeing a similar story. Right, spend is up slightly, but deals are actually down. Number of deals. So the deal size, the dollars per deal is actually up quite a bit over 2021 and certainly over 2019. When you look at, like Scott was looking at the actual assets, similar story here as well. So signage, tickets, hospitality, number 1 across the board for all the top 5 leagues. But you can see social and digital starting to creep up. So MLS number 2, NFL number 3, in terms of the number of deals that social and digital is included in, and it's in the top 5 for all leagues. So interesting breakdown here at the league level among the Big 5, of which Core works with the majority of teams. All right, switching gears a bit, we're going to dive into social media. So like Scott mentioned, and we saw in the assets and we saw in the engagement trend, social is really continuing to grow. So taking a kind of step back, looking at the social footprint among sports, global football is just in a world of its own. So when you plot, total engagement by total followers over 2022, global football absolutely dominates. They have more followers, collective followers, and more collective engagement than all other sports combined, which is kind of mind-blowing. 54% of followers, 53% of engagement, and they account for 42% of all brand value in sport on social media. When you take global football out, though, different story. So a couple other leaders emerge. Cricket and basketball, with obviously dominated by NBA, emerge as kind of the major leaders here. So cricket, call out there, despite the fact that they're far below in terms of number of total engagements compared to global football, the sport absolutely dominates in terms of engagement per entity. So 24 million engagements per entity compared to global football's 4.4 million. Basketball, led obviously by NBA, number 2 in followers and in video views, despite having much fewer leagues, teams, players. They're driving significant video viewership. They're one of the leagues that is kind of ahead of the curve in terms of video and that trend that we'll get into in a little bit. So where is the audience engaging? Where is the engagement happening? Team, Instagram, video are kind of the tops. So majority of fans engage with teams, 43% within social. Athletes are not far behind, so they account for 34% of the total engagement. By platform, Instagram just absolutely dominates. So 73% of all social engagement happens on the platform. Definitely honorable mentions for a couple others. TikTok, despite some of the kind of political noise lately, drives the most engagement per post. And then Twitter and YouTube are driving significantly more video viewership in 2022 versus 21 and 2019. In terms of a trend, video is really the driver of majority of engagement. So 37%. Every platform out there is really pushing that as a medium. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail, but video is key. Scott?
Yeah, in terms of the brands that are generating the most media value and exposure via social, there's a couple of obvious ones at the top of the list there. Nike and Adidas are pretty consistently number 1 and 2. The Nike swoosh, you can't really see a post in whether it's global football or basketball without seeing it. So they've been consistently at the top of the list by a pretty large margin over the last few years. But there's a handful of brands like Heineken and Emirates and Santander that have made the top 10 list. Really as a result of their involvement in F1. F1 drives a tremendous amount of engagement, tremendous amount of value. So you've got a handful of brands in the top 10 that are, really benefiting from their investments in sports like Formula One. When you look at brands that are on what we call brands on the rise, there's a lot of, you'll notice a lot of crypto brands and brands that are really starting to grow pretty significantly. So this list is all ranked based on their average or their percentage increase year over year from a social perspective. So yeah, Binance and Coinbase really came to the top of the list. Binance had inked up a whole bunch of deals in global football, was a jersey sponsor for the Santos FC team, and that really drove almost a quarter of their overall value last year. So yeah, they really jumped to the top of the list. Coinbase, first publicly traded cryptocurrency exchange, dove into basketball with the NBA and the WNBA, and that ended up driving about 62% of their overall value. And then obviously, you can't not call out FTX. They inked a ton of deals. Everyone really kind of understands and knows what happened with that, but that's going to probably result in a pretty major shakeup in future years as those deals, the revenue from those deals goes away. But they did make the list as well this year.
All right, so where's all that value coming from? So we're going to run through real quick the social media all-stars. Top athletes dominated by football, and specifically Ronaldo and Messi, who are just in a league of their own. Ronaldo might be the first person in history ever to hit 1 billion social followers, which is crazy. He's at 800 million right now. Messi is the only other person that's ever hit 400 million followers in Instagram, and both of them are driving significant brand value. Messi in particular, despite being kind of the twilight of his career, is really coming on strong in social media. Over the World Cup, gained 40 million new followers. He actually had his top 3 posts during the World Cup happen to be the top 3 posts of all time in social media. And since we're sitting on every post in sport, we can say that. He also had the most engaged posts ever on Instagram, which is pretty incredible. Honorable mentions to Neymar, Kylian on the football side, and then Virat on the cricket side. So I mentioned there's a lot of major cricket stars that are generating massive engagement, and Virat is one of them. When you look at the female athletes, it's definitely a more diverse group by sport. Eileen Gu focuses a lot on the APAC side, especially with TikTok. And then just to call it here for Olivia Dunn, the only college athlete on the list. So when we're looking at NIL, we are tracking all the major collegiate athletes, and pretty amazing to see that she's number 4 on the list in terms of value driven. When we look at teams, clubs, similar global football story. The major clubs in global football are dominant, especially La Liga with Real and FCB, driving the vast majority of value. But a couple of Manchester United, Paris, Saint-Germain, and Liverpool coming in and rounding out the top 5. So based on kind of all this data that we're seeing, what are some of the the best practice or the kind of insights that you can take home with you? Number one, obviously we talked about Instagram absolutely dominates. So you need to have a really strong strategy for that platform, but don't focus on that solely. Every platform has its strengths. So you need to have a diversified approach, right? Twitter is great for conversation and real-time news and updates. It's where a lot of people get their feed. They consume a lot of content. But video is actually becoming a lot more prevalent on the platform, a lot stronger. So we saw a 30% increase in video viewership year over year. Platforms like YouTube allow you to kind of get off the phone and into other devices. So despite the lower level of engagement, still a lot of viewership and the ability for you to get into tablets and actual TV. And then TikTok obviously has the highest number of engagement per post, and is becoming adopted by more and more athletes these days. Most teams and leagues are active on the platform. Athletes have been a little bit slower to on the uptake, but pretty much everyone is focused on that content, which is really the short vertical video. So number 2 is focus on video. Most platforms are pushing that content type pretty heavily. When you look at Instagram, they kind of switched everything from video direct to Reels, and they're really pushing that content throughout their algorithms. Specifically, short form vertical raw video is going to hit Reels. It's allow you to get in front of TikTok as well as YouTube Shorts. The platforms are really focused on that content type specifically within the video genre. And then in terms of promotion, what we're seeing is balanced promotion, where you have, good promotional value and quality, but not so much that it looks like an ad, is really key to driving fan engagement. So any of the content that we see look too much like an ad, we're seeing a lot less and, fractional engagement. The more you have a good balance, and the better your content is integrated with your partner and their audience, the better engagement you'll get. From that, Scott's going to dive into some industry trends we're seeing.
Yeah, thanks, RJ. So RJ and I have been incredibly passionate about this space for over 2 decades now. And when we got into the analytics and data side of the business, we coined a term called Spawn Tech about 6 years ago, where when we were looking at a lot of the other industries like ad tech and martech, where it's a lot more predictable in terms of dollars in, you understand what dollars are coming out. Sponsorship and sports marketing is still very far away from being able to do that. It's a much more emotional form of marketing, but everyone understands and I think realizes that that's where the industry needs to go. So we made a few kind of bold predictions a few years ago where, and this is really before kind of AI was really a thing, but we knew that big data sets and AI and machine learning were really going to revolutionize the way that sponsorships are measured. And we've absolutely seen that come into the fold. We use a lot of it in our existing platform in terms of how we analyze data and generate insights. And it's helping accelerate the creation of these measurement frameworks. so that you can get much more real-time data, insights, and knowledge in terms of what's working and what's not working. So it's been really interesting to see how this has really helped kind of transform and revolutionize the industry. Coupled with that is sponsorships evolving from these reactive kind of deals to being much more prescriptive, leveraging all of that data. And we've definitely seen this come to the forefront in a really big way. At the end, I'm going to talk about some feedback and insights we've gotten from our brand partners over the past couple of months. But brands are definitely shying away from these kind of packaged sponsorship deals and trying to get a lot more prescriptive in the benefits that they're looking for and trying to get more predictive in the outcomes that they're expecting. So all of this data and all the technologies and software that's available to use these days is helping sponsorships become a lot more prescriptive, and the outcomes are much more easily to predict. Granted, the cost of doing these types of deals goes up, but the value is significantly greater. So this was something that we kind of looked at over 5 years ago, and where did we want to see the industry go from a sponsorship deal structure perspective, and it's great to see this one taking shape as well. The other real trend that we were seeing was that sponsorships are being measured in real time and also being measured in-house by brands now. Historically, a lot of brands would wait for season end recaps, maybe mid-season reviews. It was very reactive, and it didn't give them time to pivot or really react to things that were working or capitalize on key moments. So every brand that we work with now is using this data in-house, and they're trying to take control of the measurement process and really helping guide and essentially dictate to the rights holder what they're expecting and what they want to do. And social media was really the biggest driver behind it. And the entire Hookit business was built off of measuring social media and really analyzing that piece of it, because social has had a really astounding kind of trend on the industry where it has created the opportunity for things to be fluid, capitalize on key moments, let things go viral. And it's the brands have really gotten savvy on how they go about kind of capitalizing on that. So it's no reason why when we do these surveys and things, 98% of the marketers that we work with are planning to activate their sponsorships through social media. And it's one of the major drivers of that, beyond kind of experiences and experiential activations. But social media is really the way that they're keeping a finger on the pulse. And then finally, this is kind of, we did a roundtable last month, and with some major brands. It was Coca-Cola, Visa, Microsoft, FedEx, Oracle. And we were really just trying to keep a finger on the pulse of what are they seeing and kind of what are their challenges that they're facing. And this was a phenomenal quote that really set with me in terms of, so one of the brands made the comment that rights holders are set up to sell sponsorships, not partnerships. And there's this increasing fatigue on sponsorship packages and what was referred to as deal stuffing. So a lot of benefits that are getting folded into these deals that many of which are irrelevant to what the brand is actually trying to do. So it kind of speaks to the lack of goal and objective alignment and what assets are truly worth to a brand. So what all these brands are, everyone at this roundtable was really focused on is they want flexibility and creativity to really be able to maximize the partnership, and are expecting the partner or the rights holder to be, a strategic partner to help them achieve the objectives that they're going after. So I think this is really the next kind of wave of things. And this is nothing to do with sponsorship, or with software or technology. This is all around kind of partnership metrics and the way that brands and rights holders work together. But this is going to be the next kind of major push on maximizing the value of these partnerships and these deals. One other kind of interesting element from a survey that we did was just where brands focus or planning to invest their money. So the biggest category was really focusing on athletes and influencers, followed by teams and leagues. So when you look at it this way, there's, basically 65% of investment is going to go into athletes and then teams and leagues, versus, media buys and things like that. So I think, in closing here, the real key takeaways here are just, as sponsorship spend continues to grow, businesses are absolutely scrutinizing budgets and the partnerships that they have right now. So they're, especially after the challenges of 2020 and 2021 with COVID, brand marketers are absolutely asking much more complex questions. So it speaks to kind of the fewer number of deals despite increased spend, but they're asking these hard questions on why do they invest in particular partnerships? What are the true objectives of each relationship? And they're not always the same across different partners. We see a lot of deals getting structured in a way where they're going after particular markets or particular audiences. So they have different rationale and different goals and objectives for each investment. The biggest one is, are they working with the right partners who truly understand their objectives and are being flexible to help them achieve the results that they're looking for? Finally, how impactful are these partnerships for the bottom line? And as I just mentioned, really looking for partnerships versus sponsorships. So yeah, we're just seeing, the evolution of the industry continues to change. It's super exciting. And then of course, social is, number one priority for activation, which is what our kind of key focus has been over the last few years. So with that, I know we're basically at time, so wanted to hand it back to Stuart, and thank you everyone for joining us today, and field some questions. I think you're muted, Stuart.
So I should be back here up on stage, and I should forget to unmute myself, because how much time did I spend reminding you to unmute yourself? And of course, I do the same thing. Great presentation, Scott and RJ, really interesting. And we have a ton of questions that have come in. So I want to just again remind our audience very quickly, if you have a question for our speakers, use the question tool you see there on your screen to submit it. We're going to get to as many audience questions as we can very shortly. So if we don't get to your question, I just want to remind you, we forward all the questions over to our sponsors. So there is always the opportunity for an offline response. Before we get to that, I'm going to answer a couple of questions that came in, because they are, first up, yes, this webinar is going to be available on demand. It's actually going to be up on our site in the on-demand area for the next 12 months. But we're going to send you a link to the on-demand version later today. Feel free to, again, share that with your colleagues if you think that they want to engage with some of this great content. Better yet, have your colleagues register. We'll send them the link directly as soon as it's available. Also, yes, today's slides are available, and you can get a PDF of today's deck in the event resources area. You should see that link over there on the left. So go on in there. It should be listed as slides. It might be listed by the file name, unfortunately, but you'll see it there again. You can grab that PDF. Also in that event resources area, I just want to point out as well, there's a link to the Adweek webinar calendar, www.adweek.com/webinars. See what we have coming up. I want to point out we've got the CIO from the Big Ten joining us for a webinar on fan engagement next week. So if you're a sports marketer, certainly one I think you want to check out. There's also a link to our resource library, which if you go into, and you will find last year's, not the upcoming one, which isn't published yet, but last year's core report. So you can go on in there and see that if you want some of those details. There's also a link to our micro-learning feature, which if you're a person who likes to learn stuff, definitely something you want to check out as well. So let's get to these questions, gentlemen. And so I'm gonna take the slides down so people can just see us and we can have a bit of a conversation. But the first question I just want to ask, because we got about 5 or 6 people asking the same question multiple different ways. Can you just quickly, rather than, you don't have to get into the nitty gritty on all this, give a sense of how you're actually measuring value as you're using that? Because a lot of people were asking, what that ultimately means. So.
Yeah, that's a good question. We meant to touch on that earlier. So I saw what does AAV stand for? So it's adjusted ad value. That's our valuation model. So we basically take, it's an engagement-based model. So we take the engagement on a post, we apply a cost per engagement to that, and then we downweight it by the quality of the promotion in that post. So it's a 0 to 100% quality that we look at. size of logo, clarity of logo, when it appeared in a video, as well as if there was any text promotion and what type of text promotion.
Mm-hmm.
I think just to add to that too, this model is something that we've developed with our brand partners. Over the years, there was a lot of concern from brands that the values felt inflated and not super useful because a lot of the rights holders are trying to present the biggest values possible. So in addition to the promotion quality scoring, we also look at competition and crowding are major factors. So is it a deliberate post for a particular brand, or are there multiple brands being promoted? So the promotion quality scoring is a model that we've developed with our brand partners to understand like how do they want to be promoted, what do they deem as a good quality post versus a poor quality post, and all of that is factored into downweight the max ad value.
Okay, can we talk a little bit about events, right? Because as you were showing your 2022. Right, we could probably look at 2 months in there, right, with the World Cup at its odd timing. But you also had, again, you looked at your list of female athletes, and number one was a snowboarder. So very clearly, it's not like people are falling outside of the Winter Olympics as some of that happens. So when we look at sort of those large scale events, what is really sort of their impact on social media and ultimately social media sponsorship?
Yeah, so we can look at the World Cup, which is, aside from the Super Bowl, the most recent. And we can, we talked about how much engagement, right? Global football accounts for 54% of the total engagement in all sport. And to put that into perspective, 14% of that engagement of global football was from the World Cup. So, a 30-day event accounting for 15% of the total engagement. And during the World Cup, we saw a lot more engagement actually on content than normal global football or football content. Engagement per post is up 117% during the tournament. We're seeing massive value being driven over that 30-day period as well. In some cases, as much as an entire league for an entire season. So big events have a big impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to follow on to the World Cup, RJ talked about Messi. We called it the Messi effect during World Cup. So he added 40 million new followers just during the 30 days around the World Cup, but he added 100 million total last year. So he had a big growth year in social, but literally 40% of his new followers from last year came just during the World Cup. So there's a lot of player.
Given Messi's role, and again, at the, I'm not going to say is at the sunset of his career, but he's toward the, he's closer to retirement than he is to rookie status. Do you see someone like that and their value continuing to go through as they sort of, right, as he's no longer at you playing, or is active player sort of a key part?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just being on that world stage, right? There's crazy to think that some people may not have known about Messi prior to the World Cup, but they do now. But I think, obviously being an active player is big. Also having a big personality is helpful. So, Messi, obviously highest level of performance, but there's other athletes that might not be as high of a level, but have a great personality and are driving significant engagement on social, even after their career is over.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk a little bit? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just the interesting part is social media has really created that platform for these athletes to extend their careers. It's one of the reasons we love it so much is, and you see certain categories like action sports, for example, so surfing, snowboarding, motocross, where they don't have the same television platform or media platform that some of the other sports do. So they tend to actually be a little bit savvier in social. Their followings may not be as big, but they have kind of grown up embracing social media as a way to promote themselves and build their personal brands, and they can control their own destiny. So I think what during their career is really when they're building that platform that they can then, extend it post-career to be able to maintain that connection and reach with their fan base and, extend their salaries as well by retaining or remaining as an ambassador and continuing to kind of be an ambassador for the sport that they're in.
Mm-hmm. Um, couple things I want to get to because we're getting a lot of questions that are sort of I want to say very similar, but one of the one again as we look at this is right. We're getting a lot of questions about college, but ultimately I think what we're getting really questions are about NIL, right? About name, image, likeness. Is that the N is name, right? Sorry, I was the Ed O'Bannon stuff. I'm going to go back and track that. But as we look at NIL, right, where sponsorship is shifting. Are you seeing an impact in NIL, and what do you see that happening? And is that, a situation where we're looking at the college careers of future professionals, or are we seeing things where it is, very much sort of focused on a very specific community, right? There's the NIL, which is broad-based. There's the NIL, which is, I'm going to sponsor the deli in a college town because I have pull there, even if I don't expand. So can you talk a little bit about like the impact of NIL and where you're seeing that go?
Yeah, I mean, it's opened up a whole new world. I mean, you saw Olivia's on the top in the top 5, which is kind of mind blowing. But you're seeing, obviously like high performance athletes driving like significant brand value and engagement. But more what we're seeing is actually really, really great personalities emerge. And I mean, they're a younger generation that gets social media. So the content they're producing is right along the trends by platform. So that's driving significant engagement as well. So for any brand that's interested, that's definitely a good space to look, specifically with athletes and those that are kind of get it from the social perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's also such a long tail as well, because there's I wouldn't say it's a short list, but the level of engagement and exposure you have to generate in social to become really valuable is pretty significant. So where we're seeing more of an impact, the restrictions that athletes faced early on was they couldn't even do clinics or coach other players and monetize themselves that way. So we're seeing a lot more of the monetization of NIL being more on that front for these kind of lesser known athletes. And but there are, several, or there's, a couple hundred athletes that are moving the needle in social, but a lot of them just don't have enough engagement or following to really monetize the social aspect of it. But it has opened up the ability for them to monetize themselves in a whole bunch of different ways that they couldn't before.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk a little bit about women's sports? Because I know that there were, again, a lot of questions in trying to sort of understand how women's sports are going to break out, right? I mean, even in the numbers that you shared of the top 5, as you looked at that, significant differences across there. But can you give a sense of sort of like not just I guess we have both women's sports, but also women's sports fans engagement and where some of that sits. So thank you. I see you're nodding. So I'm going to just rather than leave it out. RJ, you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean it's fresh in my mind because we just did an analysis on this within our global football workshop, where we saw engagement in global football was up 11%. But when you look at just the women's side, so female athletes, leagues, teams, it's actually up 24%. So double the engagement per post growth on the women's side versus the sport as a whole. So that's significant. I think that in general, there's more emphasis and focus on women's sports, rightly so. And we're seeing that come through in social engagement.
Yeah, on the brand side too, it's been a major focus. I think every conversation we have is, developing specific strategies for women's sports versus male sports has just exploded. We did an entire workshop on women in sport last summer, and functional fitness is just off the charts in terms of total engagement. And so yoga and all the instructors and things are just driving massive engagement in social. So there's a lot of additional opportunities outside of like the maiden sports like global football and maybe tennis. There's other categories that are driving tons of engagement and getting into these micro communities that where people are super passionate about particular interests and things.
question came in, and I want to touch on this just because I thought this one was very interesting. It's someone coming in from a team in a league we would recognize, but we're sort of asking about, this is someone who I think clearly is one of those people who's selling sponsorships, and looking at and asking about the difference of like approaching sponsorship from a sales perspective versus more of a marketing perspective. As we do this, and I'm curious to get your take on that, because that is something that's coming from that other side, and as brands look at things, right? I mean, it's like, again, I think you even brought this up, right? You're seeing package deals where you're getting things that nobody really wants, right? It's not, but we know, we want to get you back in, so we're going to give you X, Y, and Z. What is your recommendation as you think of the sale of this, of like what these packages ultimately should look like from the sponsor's POV?
Yeah, so this is literally what we just talked about in this last roundtable, and there was a couple interesting insights that came out of it. There was a couple of brands that I won't name who don't even look at proposals anymore. They don't want to be pitched. They don't want to be sold to. They literally pick the partners that they want to work with and they go pursue them. So that was an interesting trend, is that they're not like looking and evaluating opportunities. They're basically deciding what they want to do and they're going after it. The other interesting thing was one of the brands, is a technology company, and they're a mix of B2B, B2B2C, and their basic approach to one of the deals that they didn't go to the commercial team. They went to the CTO, talk about a business partnership and how the technologies could work together and how they could improve their operations. And they went in the CTO route versus dealing with the commercial team. So I think having the kind of flexibility and the ability to pull in other stakeholders that would benefit that brand is really interesting, so that it kind of gets around the sponsorship sale and is really focused more on how do we develop a meaningful partnership together.
Mm-hmm. Got it. I think we've got time for one more question. So I'm just going to go with a bit of a softball for the two of you, but outstanding brand campaigns that you've seen past couple months. You want to give us just a quick heads up on what you see out there and what you're liking?
Oh yeah, I mean, hands down, it's the Louis Vuitton campaign throughout that kicked off the beginning of World Cup. I don't know if anyone saw it, but we mentioned Ronaldo and Messi being the top two athletes in the world. This campaign incorporated both of them playing chess, and I think it was "Victory is a Mindset" was the kind of the slogan. And so Louis Vuitton is actually a sponsor of the World Cup. They built the case for the trophy. But only about 3% of their value actually came from that. 97% of it came from this one campaign that was launched the day the tournament started. So major pickup in major media, and it was just a great image, great content, great execution. And their spend in the World Cup is probably a fraction of that of most of the main official sponsors. But they were number 3 actually in terms of value to brands because of that campaign. They're not going to take the ball deal from Adidas. That would be right. I mean, you just put the little LV look right in the little in the little hexagons there. That might be a nice. I bet that would smell like crazy. Yeah, Scott, what stands out to you?
Yeah, I mean, that Louis Vuitton one was genius. They've got the top 2 players in the world playing chess together. And just the way that they were able to maximize their kind of integration with the players at the event. We've seen some really interesting kind of ways that brands incorporate their athletes. So really getting behind the athletes and helping basically share their stories and who they are as people beyond just the kind of figures that they are on the field. I think, the athlete integrations have been phenomenal. So I've seen some really good ones with Nike and New Balance, and they just really get behind the athlete and want to support the athletes. Oakley does a really good job of it as well. But they basically, put the athletes first, and then they are a brand supporting the athlete. So I think all of those campaigns that incorporate athletes in a really meaningful way have been super interesting as well.
Yeah. Gentlemen, we're unfortunately out of time. I could probably talk this all day because it just said New Balance. I was going to say, but I like that Kawhi and the Lindor ads. See, I actually recognize like what the brand is going with each one because there are plenty of ones I see and I don't always remember that stuff. But unfortunately, we're out of time. We didn't get to a lot of questions. I'm going to send those over to you, and I hope again as you go through, there's some maybe start a conversation offline on some of this. To our audience, I just want to provide a few quick reminders here again. Adweek.com/webinars. Check out our webinar calendar. It's there. Go on into event resources. You can grab a copy of today's deck. Check your email. We're going to be sending you that link to the on-demand version about 3:30, 4 o'clock today. So again, let me just thank our speakers here from Core and our sponsors at Core. Really appreciate these insights and looking forward to seeing the actual report when it's published. Want to thank our audience for taking time out of your busy day, and we look forward to seeing everyone at an upcoming Adweek webinar. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thanks all.